Piyush, thank you very much for being with us this evening. As William said, Piyush has travelled down from Cambridge, where he lives with his wife Fiona, and has come to speak to us this evening. And I guess, Piyush, the short version of your life is that it has been a life with many changes. Is that right?
I think that's right. So I could praise you that perhaps and tell you three things about myself. The first one is that I was born in a tiny village with no basic amenities, but now I live in this beautiful city of Cambridge. I grew up speaking Swahili and Gujarati, but now I speak English most of the time. I was born into a Hindu household, but now I call myself a follower of Jesus Christ. So I suppose that sums it up a bit.
Thank you. And we're really looking forward to hearing the story. So can I take you back to your upbringing? So Gujarati and Swahili, which part of the world? Where was the village?
So I grew up in a place called Yala, which is a tiny village about 26 miles northwest of Kisumu. Kisumu, as you may know, is the third largest city in Kenya. It's on Lake Victoria. And Yala is just a bit north and just a bit west. Yala at that time was just a dirt track with a few houses on either side, had no running water, no electricity. And yeah, I grew up there with my family. So I'm from an Indian background. So although I was born in Kenya. My mother was born in Kenya too, but ethnically, I'm from an Indian background. That's where Gujarati comes from.
And just to help us understand your life then, so father is a doctor as well, and you're...
No, not at all, not at all. My father at that time grew sugarcane. Sugarcane is an important crop in Kenya, and he grew sugarcane, and he would sell that to... He would actually use the sugarcane first and make the juice and a thing called jaggery, which is like raw sugar. And that the jaggery was then sold to the Africans. They would use that to make alcohol called changa. And that's what my father did. Mother had a shop, a typical African shop.
In the village?
In the village, yes. There were only a few shops, and she was one of those. And they sold everything, as a little shop would. And the folks from around the village would always just come in to this little few shops here to buy their stuff and then go back to their households and settlements and things like that.
And then what brought you to England some years later?
So we came in you may know that in late 70s, next door in Uganda, Idi Amin caused a lot of political upheaval at that time. A lot of the Indians at that time in Uganda were expelled. Kenya was also going through a similar sort of thing, but quietly and not as overtly. And my parents were just gently pushed out from Africa and Kenya. So they came here, like all the other Asians really, with nothing at all. They had to leave everything behind, come to England and start a new life.
And for you, am I right, you had not been to school up to then and you spoke no English, is that right?
Yes.
And you land in England and at school aged 13?
That's right, yes. I'd been to school for 6 weeks at one stage. I didn't get on, because school at that time, you had to go elsewhere to Kenya. Yala didn't have a school, so you had to go to Kisumu for school. My eldest two brothers went, and I went for 6 weeks and somehow didn't get on. It didn't last, so came back home again.
And just what was it like arriving in an English school with no English, having never been to school? What was your experience?
Well, you can imagine. Quite strange, really. Strange because I was the only ethnic child in my school at that time. Difficult because obviously I was so different. I was shunned, couldn't speak the language, and kids can at that age be quite cruel and experience some of that. And it was just a bizarre experience, just strange experience of trying to learn English at the same time, learning Latin at the same time, learning music at the same time. Haven't done any of those at all. But I must say the teachers were very, very kind. And I had extra lessons at the end of the day, most days where I would step back and I would get one-to-one teaching.
So from no school to super long school?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I mean, you're making light of it slightly, but that must have been very, very difficult. What impact do you think that sort of early experience of racism and that experience, what do you think that impact had on you?
So I think at the time of school, initially I think it drove me. Because I was shunned and I didn't have folks to talk to, or there were lots of comments made about me, I just fought against that. And the way I fought wasn't physically or verbally, but I fought by being determined that I will show them. And therefore I worked and studied and trying to just impress them that actually just because I'm never been to school doesn't mean I'm stupid, because they assumed I was just completely stupid. I had been to school, I knew nothing about anything, so of course I'm stupid. So it drove me quite a bit. Yeah.
And you're then sort of between a number of different cultures. What impact do you think their cruelty had on how you saw yourself in your family's culture, in English culture?
Yes. So, I was at an age when I was at school many hours a day. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be liked by everybody. And one way I would do that would be to just shun my Indianness and become more and more like them. So I was living this life in school where I was trying to adapt to this English culture. At home, it was very different because parents wanted to retain their Indianness and Hindu culture. And so I was living in Indian. So I was almost a schizophrenic kind of lifetime. So I think ethnic people, Indians would call ourselves coconuts. You may have heard of that phrase. It basically means although we're brown on the outside, white on the inside, white meaning culturally you want to be accepted, so you want to become like the indigenous culture. So I think it was pushing me towards that sort of thing, yes.
And can I ask just a bit about Hinduism at home and what that meant for you? How devout was your family? How did that work once you were in England?
Yes, so they continue to practice their Hinduism. So like most Indian families and Hindu families, they would have a shrine in one of the rooms. And most days there'll be a flame lit to the deities and prayers said. Once a week, families would go to the temple. And a lot of festivals in Hinduism, as you probably know. So the culture and the religion is mixed together and lots of things going on. So they, as much as possible, try to retain all that sort of things. And I was part of it, and I joined in with all that.
And I imagine there may be some questions later. Please do send them in. But if I gave you just 30 seconds now to explain the sort of Hinduism as a religion, as a worldview, is that long enough? 30 seconds? What would you say?
But if I start with saying there are 33 million gods, and we can talk about each one of them, perhaps.
Okay, maybe. Well,
no, it's obviously impossible to summarize because it's such a complex religion, and it means different things to different Hindus, depending on which part of India you come from. So some Hindus are vegetarians, some are meat eaters. But I suppose the essence of it is that there is the ultimate Brahman, who is the impersonal, amorphous God. There is a system of karma, which is action and a reaction. There is a system of reincarnation. And the idea being that more and more we become more and more devout, more and more faithful, trying to live a life, a better and better life. We go through the cycles of incarnation until hopefully one day, if we are good enough, we join into this impersonal old Brahman. Yeah. So that, I suppose, in a nutshell. But there's lots of complexity around it. And again, the scriptures are so vast and so different, but very different. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to move you on a bit, but just from school through to your professional life beginning, you must have really shown them, because you trained and qualified as a dentist, then as a doctor as well, just in your spare time, then as a max fax surgeon, which is quite difficult, I believe. How do you explain your success? What was driving you? Say a bit more about that.
I suppose a simple answer would be that education before the age of 13 is a waste of time. Let's start at 13. And
children might be watching. Don't say that.
And sometimes I do think that we make too much of it. And I'm afraid I did the same with my two children. We tend to make too much of it at such a young age. But I think, yes, I think it partly, probably you probably know that when a new batch of immigrants come in, there is a work ethic. There is, people do apply themselves, they work very hard, and they do try and achieve things. My parents were very helpful in that. They helped me at school and pushed me along through that day. Yeah, and again, and you come with nothing from a different continent, and you have to make a new life. So it is hard work, and there is a drivenness there. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I want to bring you now into London. You're in your first hospital job in London, or you're an SHO in a London hospital, and you begin to meet real Christians. And just tell me about those people and what struck you about them.
Yes, so I came, as you said, I did dentistry. So I came to London first and became qualified as a dentist. I never worked as a dental practitioner in a practice, but I worked in hospitals all the time. And I worked in a field called oral surgery, which is surgery of the jaws, broken jaws, misshaped jaws, oral malignancies, things like that. I used to work in a hospital in London doing that. And the first encounter, I suppose, I had with somebody who's a follower of Jesus was a girl I used to work with at that time. We were both SHOs, which means we were quite junior doctors. We would spend a lot of hours at work and a lot of time on call and that sort of thing, which I suppose was my first encounter.
And what did you notice about her? What was different about her?
There was something amazing about her, which I didn't have. There was an integrity about her. There was an honesty about her. There was, I think the word I often use is there was a transparency about her. So everything you could see about her, you could meet and see, and it was just lovely to see that integrity in a person like that, which was so different to me. And I only began to realize how different I was when I actually saw her. And I began to realize that actually I'm a bit of a hypocrite. I'm a bit of a sham. I had an outward facade. I showed my good side to everybody. But I decided about me which wasn't that good, which I kept hidden. And I just thought everybody's like that. But knowing and meeting her really just made me realize how twisted I was, I suppose, how different I was, and how hypocritical I was in the way I was living. And yeah.
Okay, and she sounds nice. Just a good friend?
You can see where this is going, can't you? I suppose naturally two people working together and working long hours together. But yeah, so things did develop, and we began to go out, and romantically we were attached together, and yeah.
But it was not entirely a smooth story, was it?
No, sadly not. Sadly not. I suppose again it shows how I was so different to what she was like. I was duplicitous. So, for example, one thing she did not know about me was that I already had a girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And somehow I had acquired two girlfriends, and I was two-timing her. And yeah.
For a period of time?
Yes, so this went on for many months. Of course, this involved, just to keep that going would mean more and more deceit, more and more secrets, more and more hiddenness, more and more a life which was getting, spiraling out of control a bit. They didn't know, of course, my My male friends knew a bit about it, and they would joke a bit about it, but yeah, this went on for a few months.
And what brought that to an end?
So one day, one infamous evening, I was invited to this Christian girl's house for evening supper. Nothing special about that. That used to happen quite often, so I would often go up there and we'll have a meal together in the evening. So this evening, I just turned up as if I have always done. But when I got there, they were both there.
Both girls?
Both girls were there. Oh, goodness. Not one of my favorite evenings, you can imagine. They both found out somehow that this was happening. They got together, and then they invited me to that and confronted me at that evening.
And I mean, it's slightly like a TV show, isn't it? This is sort of, you must have some admiration for them, but at the same time, that must have been quite a painful evening.
It was, yeah. So when I usually tell that story, there's usually a room full of people. There's nobody here at all at the moment. There's often a sharp intake of breath, or people sometimes, that sort of thing. But but mostly people are polite, but quiet. But yeah, it was a shocking thing to do. And I suppose the shockingness of it can be expressed by, so I once told this story in Romania. And I was on a medical mission in Romania, and I was with a bunch of Christian people. We were helping both medically, but also in Christian things. And I was telling this story to a room full of people. And in one corner, there was a bunch of teenagers there. And I got to this part of the story, and they realized what I just said, because I had a translator. And they began to boo and hiss and began to throw things at me and that sort of thing.
And that's why there's no one here tonight. Otherwise, we would have.
Yes.
But just say, why did it affect you so deeply? So obviously there's the initial sadness and shock, but why? It had a very profound effect on you, didn't it?
It did. It absolutely did. Do you know, so from being just initially a joke and something I was doing, and then I got caught up in the intrigue and the web of deceit, then when I saw them both, and they were both incredibly hurt, and I realized what I'd done, and I felt awful that night. I absolutely went awful. So obviously, there was it was a terrible night. You can imagine what had happened. Went home that night, and I could not sleep at all that night because of what I'd done. It was a dreadful, dreadful thing. And then an interesting thing happened next morning. Next morning, the Christian girl phones me up and says, "Piyush, I forgive you for what you've done." And that really shocked me.
Did that make it feel better?
No, her intention was, I think, to console me and to make it easier for me. But actually made me feel even worse.
Go on, say why.
Because I think partly because the more I saw of her nature and her kind, forgiving nature, the more I saw how horrible I was. And something which was meant to be consoling and comforting was actually really showed me up and how dreadful I was within me. So I think that was then the downward spiral of just me. Before that, you see, I used to think very highly of myself. I'd done well in my exams. I'd passed all my exams with flying colors. I, a good sportsman. I was captaining my hockey and cricket teams. I'd always had lots of friends, and life was great. When this happened, all those things mattered not one little bit. But not only that, but I began to see more and more of me, which actually was also not good at all and filthy inside. And I'd done other things in my life which also just showed me up. I began to realize that I wasn't who I thought I was, which is this wonderful person. I kidded myself with this facade. This is who I was. But actually within me, I realized that I looked in the mirror and I did not like what I saw. And I wanted to be different. And I just was a bit of a mess. And that went on for several weeks, yeah.
And your experience of guilt, what is guilt? How did it feel to you?
I suppose I did, at that time, I wouldn't have called it guilt because I didn't know what that meant. But I knew that I'd done something really badly wrong, and I was ashamed of it. I didn't have any concept of guilt and God and all the other things like that. I had a bit of that in the sense of, in Hinduism, as I said earlier on, there's an action and a reaction. So as I said, I wanted to be different. And this girl was so different because she had her faith. Well, I had my faith. So I went back to Hinduism to try and help me, console me with that.
And did that help?
I'm afraid it didn't. It made it feel much worse because of this action and reaction, all these karmas I'd committed, I knew that I'd have to somehow repay that somehow and deal with that somehow, either in this life or the life to come. And again, instead of being a comfort, he was actually made things much, much worse. Yeah.
So having looked for comfort in Hinduism, you began going to church, didn't you? Is this right? And you started going to 2 different churches. Is that right?
I did, yes.
Every Sunday, 2 churches.
Yes.
And I looked up where they are, those churches, and I think it means you must have had to come past us to get from one church to the other without ever coming in. So that we're very offended about that. But you were going to church twice Sunday. You were doing a sort of like Christianity Explored that we talked about.
Yes. So initially I went to a church in Plumstead in East London. It was a free church, and again, a work colleague introduced me to that church. I would drive 9 miles on a Sunday morning to that. And yes, on a Sunday, I would drive past St. Helens to go to a church called All Souls, which was 13 miles the other way. And the evening, I would go up there. And again, I was introduced to a course for people who are not Christians, but who want to explore it. I wanted to explore the Christian faith because I saw this girl, and there was something amazing about her, which I thought her faith had made her different. So I wanted to find out about that. So it was called Agnostics Anonymous. I suppose a bit like the course you run here, which William mentioned, called Christianity Explored.
And you enjoyed it?
No.
Good. We'll edit that out later. No, we're live, aren't we?
I didn't enjoy it for these reasons. Because I was very angry. I was very cut up inside. I didn't enjoy it initially because initially what I heard was this exclusive nature of the Christian faith. And they were somehow dissing my Hinduism and my culture. That's what I perceived at that time. And the only truth they were proclaiming was the truth of the Christian faith and nothing else. So I found that very hard at the beginning, and I was angry at that. I was frustrated by, they always kept referring to the Bible all the time, and I never owned the Bible, I never read the Bible, and all the answers seemed to come from there, and again, that irritated me. But I couldn't stop going. Although it wasn't always a happy experience, I just wanted to find out. And then they gave me a Bible. So I read that Bible at home. And it was a very easy to understand version of the Bible, at that time called the Good News Bibles. So I could certainly read it, but I couldn't understand what it said. There was, never having read it before, it was all a bit of a mystery to me, and yeah.
So, and you then, I think it's right, you sort of went back and had another go at Hinduism and other religions, is that right?
Yes, it threw me back again. So I actually, now as a Christian, I know far more about Hinduism now than I ever did before. I know far more about Islam or Buddhism than I ever did before, just because I wanted to know where truth actually lay. Yeah.
And again, in the questions later on, Piyush has kind of said, please do ask questions about any other religion or how you ended up making your choice.
I'm a Christian now rather than anything else, yeah.
But so but you kept going to these churches all the way through that.
Yeah.
So you're investigating other religions, but coming to those churches as well. And then there comes a significant day or 2 days in 1982. Just tell us how did you end up coming to call yourself a Christian?
Yes, so going to church was a strange experience because I'd never been to church before. And they did church in a funny way. And it all culminated in this particular weekend, as you mentioned. So I went to church at Plumstead on a Sunday morning, And you know, even now, I can't remember almost anything about that service at all. There would have been some readings. I can't remember what they were. There would have been some prayers. I have no idea what they were. There would have been a sermon. And the preacher there was very emotional. He didn't just speak his sermons, he shouted them out. But even that, I cannot remember anything which was said at all. But at the end of the service, there was another song, which Christians called hymns, which they were singing, and I couldn't sing. So I never sang any of these things. I would just read the words and follow the words in the hymn book. I've got that. Should I just bring that up?
Yeah, so that's where we all are now. None of us are allowed to sing now. So
Yes. I can sing in the church now when I follow my wife because she's a good singer. So this was the hymn, which was particularly struck me. Do you know the first verse talks about unnumbered blessings give my spirit voice. I had absolutely no idea what these unnumbered blessings were and what they were singing about. The second verse talks about his deeds, his arm has done. And so what are these deeds he's done? What is this thing he's done? And what is this? I have absolutely no idea at all. The third verse was a verse that really hit me. A sentence in that verse goes like this: proud hearts and stubborn wills are put to flight. Proud hearts and stubborn wills are put to flight. And that verse seemed to just penetrate deep within me. And I began to realize that actually I am very proud and very stubborn. So I left church that morning, and all afternoon the phrase kept ringing in my mind: proud hearts and stubborn wills are put to flight. The more it just rang, the more I realized how stubborn I was. So in the evening, I drove past St. Helens again to All Souls, and this time it was a different experience for some reason. And All Souls, again, a bit like St. Helens, is a big church full of people. But that evening, for some reason, it appeared as if the preacher was addressing me only. He was speaking directly to me. And I felt very uncomfortable. Why is he talking to me tonight? And it's a very, very strange experience. So I was there, and the next day was Monday. So I went back again on Monday to Agnostics Anonymous. And it so happened that that evening they were talking about this thing called the cross, by which it's a cross on which Jesus actually died. And I knew nothing whatsoever about the cross. And they trying to explain to me what the cross actually meant. And you know, all the things they said, 90% of it, I just didn't have a clue what they were talking about. It just went over my head. But there was this 10%, which I found profound and amazing, because it meant that finally I found, after weeks and weeks of turmoil, I found this place and this thing, this cross, which meant that my past could be forgiven. I could wipe things clean. I could start again. And the burden of guilt and this horribleness could be forgiven. So that evening, I went home. For the first time, I knelt by my bed and prayed to Jesus. And I said sorry for the hypocrisy and the deceit and all the horrible things I'd done. I said that I wanted help to live my life differently, to live with Him as my Lord. I was told at that time also to pray for the Spirit to come within me. So I prayed that God would send His Spirit within me and give me this new life. So so February 23rd, 1982 was that fateful evening. It was a dark evening, cold evening. It was raining and horrible, but there's a night I first prayed.
And what kind of difference did that then make? What did you have to do about that afterwards?
So I suppose the next day, I was still me, still Piyush, but different. Because, I did feel forgiven. I did feel that this burden had been lifted off me. I did feel a peace within. And I did feel different. And it was the beginnings of a new life even then, yeah.
And how, presumably at some point, you told your parents. How did that go?
Yes, so my parents, as I said, are Hindus. So I initially told them what had happened. And my parents initially were not too upset. They thought this was a passing fad, that I would just go through with this and then move on. So initially, they weren't too upset. But as I went on, and after about 12 months or so, I wanted to get baptized. Can I just explain a bit what?
Please.
So baptism, it's symbolism in the Christian faith. Basically, what it is an outward expression of what has happened to me inwardly, spiritually. So spiritually, inwardly, Christ has washed me clean and given me a new life. And so in the baptism, that's symbolized within going into water, dying to the past, and rising up again into a new, clean, forgiven, new life person. And I wanted to show people and tell people that that's what has happened to me inwardly through Christ and His Spirit. So I wanted to do that. So I knew I had to tell my parents that. I was absolutely petrified to speak to them, to tell them. So I would make a couple of phone calls, but bottle out and couldn't tell them. So in the end, I wrote a letter and told them about that I was going to get baptized.
And just very briefly, a little bit, why were you concerned? What did they think you were saying to them as a family, as a culture? What did they think that becoming a Christian meant?
So as soon as they heard that I was going to be baptized, they were extremely upset. They were upset because they perceived that I'm turning my back, not just on Hinduism, but on my parents and all they'd done for me in their upbringing, on the culture, on everything else. I wasn't doing any of that at all. So therefore part of me just did not want to become a Christian. I didn't want to upset my parents. But I couldn't walk away from the person of Jesus who I'd met. So there was this tug of war within me. My mum went to bed for a week, didn't eat or drink as if she wanted to die. My siblings were very, very cross with me. I'm upsetting a close-knit family, and they thought I was being selfish and didn't think about them at all. So it was quite a tough time.
And so why choose Jesus if it's that difficult in the family?
Yeah, so partly because I wasn't rejecting them. My choosing Jesus did not mean that I was rejecting, although that's what they perceived. That's not what I was doing. What I'd found in Christ, having weeks of this turmoil, was this amazing offer of a forgiveness and a new life in Him, which nothing else could offer. I'd made a mess of myself, and I wanted to be different. I wanted to be that wholesome person, there was nowhere else I could go to find that, and I really wanted that. So I therefore, despite my parents' objections, I carried on and got baptized.
Piyush, we're very nearly out of time, and there's questions I wanted to ask you that I'm hoping now someone will ask for the Q&A later on. So I've said it'd be great to ask you more about other religions. I imagine as well you've done a few science exams in your time. You probably have some friends who've asked you to think hard about science and religion. It'd be great to pick that up later. I've got, I think, just time for one last question, which is, you've been a Christian since 1982, doing the job that you have, and in that time you must have seen a lot of suffering. So you're delivering the news to people that they have cancer. I think even you had to do that for someone close in your family. How do you reconcile the loving God of the Bible with your work and your experience of suffering?
Yes. Again, perhaps I could just touch on it, because if you're short of time, we can pick it up later. I think that simply put, there's lots of, as you know, this is a big, big topic, and it's one of the hardest questions for the Christian faith. So we could go philosophical on this and talk about how does God allow suffering, but that's never helpful. When a person sits in front of me who's got a cancer, they never want to know about the intricacies of the cancer, why this cancer, whatever. All they want to know is, Piyush, can you help me through this cancer? Can you give me hope through this into not having this cancer? And the Bible is also, in the same way, very practical. It's a book which teaches me about how I relate to God and how He relates to me. A book which helps me through the ups and downs of life, even through the cancers. Again, perhaps you can pick that up a bit later. So there is hope which the Bible gives in the face of suffering, which nothing else can give.
Piyush, thank you so much. It's been fascinating. We could carry on much longer, but we will pick those up in question time. So I'm going to pause us there. There'll be a very short break, and then the screen will come live again, and we'll be looking at a bit of Mark's Gospel together. Well, thank you. What I want to do now is to take us to some words of Jesus to help us continue thinking about the things that Piyush has helped us with. And it's a verse in Mark's Gospel, chapter 2 and verse 17. And if you were able to get hold of a copy of Mark online or lying around at home somewhere, I'd really recommend that you get hold of what we look at tonight and look at it some more afterwards. So Mark chapter 2, where Jesus talks about how he sees himself. And he sees himself as a doctor. So let me read verse 17. Jesus said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a doctor, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." So Jesus, he sees himself as a doctor for sinners. He's not here for the good people. He is here for the guilty, the ones who know that they need a cure. And what I want to do is look at 3 incidents that build up to that statement from Jesus, 3 incidents in his life. And first I want to look at a moment when he met a leper and a moment when he met a tax collector. And taking those 2 together, we see the offer that Jesus is making. So that's the first thing I have for us tonight, the offer that Jesus is making. And those 2 people, the leper and the tax collector, they are all about social distancing. So our experience at the moment, we have nothing on them. So the leper, maybe that is obvious, makes some sense. There was a risk of contagion. And a leper's life was deeply distanced for their entire life from the moment that they developed the disease. They were thought to be highly contagious physically, but also in spiritual terms, unclean and contagious there as well. Then the second one, the tax collector, maybe I need to explain a bit more. They were seen to be contagious spiritually, that you might catch sinfulness from them. So when we meet this tax collector, he has decided to follow Jesus, and Jesus is now eating with him in his house. And let me read to you what the religious people thought of that. The scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to Jesus' disciples, and you need to imagine a sort of sneer, a religious sneer, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And to be a tax collector then was slightly different to today. The country is under Roman occupation. They're cooperating with Roman rule. And they were seen as contagious. The leper and the tax collector, 2 different sorts of contagion. It's like the first week of lockdown. If you remember back in March, when you first saw someone coming towards you on the pavement, you get clear. I don't want them. And Jesus, he breaks the lockdown In both cases, he eats with Levi, calls him to be a disciple of his. And with the leper, let me read to you, the leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling, said to him, "If you will, you can make me clean." And moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I will be clean." And earlier I was talking to Piyush about his life as a surgeon and the amount of effort it takes to be clean and the scrubbing and the washing and the clothes. But also Piyush said, I guess they don't do this as practical jokes, but that if anyone touches you once you're clean, you go right back to the beginning and start again. You're not clean. If something drops, it's a bit like we're meant to with our face masks and touching our face. But in surgery, it really matters. I'm sure it matters everywhere. But once you're touched, you're not clean. And it's the same here. Jesus reaches out and touches the leper. And Jesus should be unclean from that point on, but he isn't. He cleans the leper, which makes sense if he is the sin doctor, the guilt doctor. He is the one who makes the guilty clean. Jesus, he's not like a vaccine, sort of helping us fight off the disease. This is a permanent, total solution to the problem of guilt and sin and uncleanness. And as I said, I recommend you read this account later, Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, chapter 2, right at the beginning of Mark's book. But as you do, let me just point out a few things for you to notice as you go through. Look for these. So look for that sense that Jesus is so clean that he reverses the flow, if you like. He touches the unclean thing. He's supposed to be contaminated, but he's so clean, he drives it back and makes the person clean. Look out for how he feels, for his pity, his compassion for the people that he meets. And look out for what he achieves. So there are different ways it's expressed, but they are left clean and cured and forgiven. And look out for the result in their lives. So the leper is touched, maybe the first time someone has touched him for years and years. And then Jesus sends him to the temple. He's accepted back into the people, his nation, his family, and accepted back by God. He can be close to people again. And the same thing with Levi. The Pharisees won't go near him, but Jesus will sit and eat with him. Come out of lockdown, Levi and the leper. Jesus has cleaned you. You're not contagious anymore. It's everything that Piyush was talking about that he discovered in Jesus. You can start again, clean and forgiven. So that's Jesus' offer. He is the super clean one, the doctor. He will have pity, compassion, and he will make you clean and forgiven and bring you close. And the truth that Piyush discovered, that Jesus will have him despite guilt, is the truth for all of us and could be true for you this evening. That's the offer. Well, second, I want to look at the credentials. So in between those two stories, those two outcasts, there is another healing in between, the healing of a paralyzed man. And the aim there, as Mark records it, is to set out Jesus' credentials as the doctor. And credentials, I think, are pretty important, particularly in a doctor. When we were talking to Piyush, I think if I'd said, so you arrive at school at 13 and never been to school before, and I'd said, so presumably you were successful from that point on. If Piyush had said no, if he'd said, well, actually, yeah, I never got any A-levels and didn't qualify as a dentist, didn't qualify as a doctor, that would affect my confidence if I was due to be sliced open around the neck and mouth by Piyush tomorrow morning. So Jesus, your qualifications, your credentials. And that is what the story in chapter 2 is all about. And I'm going to read bits of that to you and show you that. So Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days. It was reported he was at home, and they're excited. So many gathered together, there was no more room even at the door. And because of that, when someone comes who wants to be healed, they came bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And when they'd made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. So that is exciting, isn't it? It's a kind of earthen roof that they've dug through, and the paralytic arrives at Jesus' feet. And there's excitement, and everyone is expecting Jesus to heal the man. They've seen him do it again and again and again. The man is going to get up and walk out of the door. And that is despite, and again, I'm sure Piyush could tell us later, despite the physical barriers in the way to that, the wasted muscles, the damaged nerves, Jesus has power over, well, biology, chemistry, and physics. And they all know that, they all expect it. But Jesus, he does triage on the man, looks at him and says, "My son, your sins are forgiven." And again, please ask a question, but Jesus is not linking the 2 issues the man has. He's not linking his sin and his paralysis. Jesus is simply noticing both and choosing to go first for the one that no one else in that room would have chosen. Sin and paralysis, Jesus goes for sin and says, "You are forgiven." He's the doctor of sin and he forgives him. And as Jesus says that, everyone in the room loses their mind. So let me read you the next verses. Some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And Jesus decides to have some fun with the question, and he sort of walks them through what is happening here. Says, "Why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, take up your bed and walk'?" In other words, you are on board with me doing the healing. You're expecting me to say, "Get up and walk," even though that is hard. Really quite hard, the sort of number of things you'd have to do medically. You know I have power and authority in that area, but you have no clue that I might also have authority in the other area, the other hard thing, the other God thing. So he says that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home." And I guess, at least for the paralyzed man, that is very important. Not just his legs, but he knows for certain that when Jesus said, "Your sins are forgiven," Jesus had the credentials, the power, and the authority to say that. Jesus has the power and the authority of God. Only God can forgive sins, and Jesus is God and he can. It connects to the sort of exclusive nature of Christianity that Piyush was talking about. Only in this man, Jesus Christ, is the authority to forgive sins. And so that means if he offers to put an end to your guilt, there is no higher authority. There is no court of appeal above Jesus. He is the doctor, and he sees our guilt as our greatest need. And you ask, does he want to help us? He does. He is as a doctor is to cancer, so Jesus is to guilt. Can he? Piyush, I think your success was something like 80% success. Jesus has a 100% success rate. Someone comes to him, asks for forgiveness. Jesus has the power to forgive. Which means, however you arrived on this live stream this evening, however you felt as Piyush was speaking, whether you resonate with some of that talk of hypocrisy and guilt and uncleanness, whether you feel excluded from God and distant, you could leave the live stream tonight clean and forgiven and close to Jesus and starting again with everything washed away. And as Jesus said, it is those who are sick that he came for, and those who know that they need him. All you have to do is bring your need for forgiveness. And Jesus says to you, as he said to Levi, follow me, which means turn your life over to him. That may be painful to do. It may involve perhaps even the kind of conversations that Piyush had to have with his parents, explaining he is with Jesus, now following Jesus, but not necessarily turning his back on them and their culture, their family. It may mean turning your back on ways that you've lived your life. To walk with Jesus, following him, is to walk away from the areas in our life that Jesus would call sin and that incur guilt as we follow him. But if we do that, then what Jesus said to the paralyzed man, he says to us, says, my son, my daughter, your sins are forgiven.
Well, now, welcome back, and we have some excellent questions that have come in already. Do please send in more questions if you'd like to do that. And we've got about 15 minutes to take these questions. Let's begin, Piyush, if we may, with you. And the question is, why are you a Christian now? 38 years on, why are you a Christian now rather than any of the other religions that you investigated?
I suppose I could add to that, why did I feel so cross initially when the Christian faith was so exclusive in its explanation? I think what I'd want to say is that as I look at other religions, as I look at Hinduism, as I look at Buddhism, Islam, there's something similar with all those religions, which is this, that if I am devout enough, if I am faithful enough, if I am rigorous in my self-control, if I live a life which is good enough for God, then perhaps one day I will get to God. And that's a basic tenet in different formulations. That's what they basically say. What I found with the Christian faith was the complete opposite of that. Because I knew I was full of deceit and other things. I knew I could not live a life which was good for God and good enough for God. But yet here, on the other hand, was an offer of God saying to me, no matter what you've done, no matter where you are, come to me and I will forgive you. I've paid the price which your karmas are paid for by me. And I will give you a new life. So very, very different. So a group on one side which says, try, endeavor, work hard, be that good person. The other side says, you can never be good enough, but I will help you.
Thank you so much. Well, there's another question here which I think you've answered. Islam promises forgiveness. Allah is merciful. How is Christianity different? I don't think you need to say anything. There's a great question here. How can somebody 2,000 years ago forgive my sin? I wonder if you could tackle that for us, Charlie.
I think to understand that, you need to understand why they were so cross that he claimed to forgive sin. Because to them, it was absolutely obvious that only God could do that. God is the only one who stands outside of time. God is the one offended. Principally when we break his rules, when we turn against him. And so God is the one who can forgive. And what Jesus is claiming, he steps into that space emphatically and says, yes, only God can forgive sins. And now let me heal this man so you know who I am. So Jesus is not just a man from 2,000 years ago. He is the God who made this universe. He's alive now. And his promises, if you like, here are good today. His death that he died, that Piyush mentioned, paid the price for that forgiveness 2,000 years ago. But that is an ability he has now for people in every nation, in every age, to offer forgiveness to us.
So just what happened at the cross?
Yeah. So, and this, again, please get hold of Mark's Gospel and keep reading it through. And if you did, you'd get just beyond halfway through to a verse in Mark chapter 10, where Jesus is talking about his death, and he says that he came not to be served, as a king might expect to be, or God, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus' death is the payment, the price that sets us free. And what it is really at its simplest is a swap. So all of my guilt and all of the punishment from God that I deserve for it, Jesus says that can all be transferred to him. And instead of my guilt, I get all of Jesus's high status. All the good things he did are poured on my head as if I had done them. So it's more than just a bit of forgiveness. It is a total new start, as Piyush said. And you are clean, you're forgiven, you are the child of God from that point.
Thank you so much. Well, look, just one or two others on the other religion side of things. So surely if I listen to talk similar to this by somebody who is a Christian and is now a Hindu, and would say they found the truth, they would say exactly the same. So how are you sure that this is the true religion instead of any of the other religions celebrated?
So I can, again, let me speak personally, if I may. The other religions, I think what they also say, they invite me to a doctrine or a system of belief or a way of forming religious functions and things like that. The Christian faith doesn't do that. It says, Jesus Christ says, come to me. So I'm not going to some sort of a religious tradition or whatever. I'm coming to the person, Jesus. Come to me, those who are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And he's the one who claimed to be that truth, that life, that way. And I suppose for me, that resonates so much that there's a person, God himself, come down to earth as a man, who is the truth, and I'm being invited to come to the person, not just to some. We could debate philosophies like this against that, but this is not what I'm doing. I'm coming to a person of Christ.
Tell us, today, what attracts you to Jesus? If you had to take perhaps 2 or 3 aspects of Jesus, what attracts you to him?
Where do I start? So all we've spoken about today is just forgiveness of our sins, which is a great, great start. But that's just the beginning. But as soon as I'm forgiven, I'm united to Christ and to God. And the promise is nothing will separate me from that. I'm promised that he will be with me and in me. He's given a name Emmanuel, which is God with me. So God is, instead of being distant as in Hinduism, which I'm trying to reach, is actually within me. He pours his love into my heart through his Holy Spirit. That's again a promise. Not just a little trickle, but pours his love. And he does that because he's love, he grants me love. He leads me in ways of righteousness. So when I'm struggling about what to do, how to live, whatever to do, as I was struggling before, day by day, I pray that today, Lord, lead me in your righteous ways. And he does that, and he promises to do that. He is changing me time and time again. Remember I said, I looked in the mirror, I did not like what I saw. But he's making me a different person. So I'm different today than I was 30 odd years ago because he's reshaping me. But I could go on. But.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Now, but so much of what we know of Jesus is in the written accounts of the Gospels. So there's a question here, can I trust, you've been talking from Mark's Gospel, can I trust it?
Thank you. It's a great question. It's a very important question, and it's one that Christianity Explored would pick up or would recommend books on. But at its simplest, we can have confidence in the Gospels the same way we have confidence in everything in history. So everything you know, actually, unless you were actually there yourself, is mediated to you through witnesses that you trust or through sources that you trust. So the question is the reason to take these sources seriously as historical documents? And William will stop me when this is too boring as an answer, but there is very good reason when you compare them to similar books at the time, to take both their transmission, so that we have actually the words that people wrote, and the truthfulness of what they wrote, when we can check them against each other. We have 4 accounts of Jesus' life. We have the letters of the earliest Christians from even earlier than the Gospels, which confirm the major details of the story. We have confirmation from people who are not Christians, who often were very hostile to Christian faith, who corroborate again Jesus' death, his resurrection, the events, when it happened, what Christians believed about it. So yes, if you ever read any book about an event that you were not present at, then read this book on exactly the same standards and ask the same questions. Are these people reliable? Are they telling the truth? The person that they're describing that they met, why do they believe about him the things that they do? They are convinced that their good friend Jesus, who they saw executed, they're convinced that they were with him 3 days later, eating food, barbecuing fish on the beach, walking with them, that he was alive. And they base their life on it, and that's what drives them to write these books. And you can read the books and have access to what they said and saw and make up your mind about what you think was going on.
There's a great book, which you, perhaps if you're listening, you could easily look up. It's by Peter Williams, entitled Can I Trust the Gospels? And it really is outstanding. You probably know Peter, do you?
I do know Peter. So Peter speaks 4 ancient languages. He speaks Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. And his interest of research is just on this. It's a fantastic book. He's an academic in Cambridge, very bright, but it's a fantastic book.
It's so kind of simple.
Yes, it is.
Written by...
But can I add to that a bit more? So I often run courses for people who are not believers. And this question always comes up at the beginning. How can we trust what we're reading? And I always ask them to delay that question until the end of the course when we've read the account. And by the time you've read the account and gone to the end of the course, question disappears because the Bible speaks for it. It's an amazing, what we call a living book. And that's how we meet the person of Jesus. And often, as you read it, I think before reading Peter Williams, read the Bible first.
Yes.
And I think you'll just find it's an amazing book.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you, Piyush, so much. Now, I want to get on to the issue which you were actually speaking on in just a moment, but very briefly, if you can, this is too big a question, really, but in your experience, has science contradicted or reaffirmed the existence of God? Charlie invited us to ask that question. Here it is.
I suppose, again, it's such a big question, but let me just try and simplify it. So as I said, I work in Cambridge. I have friends in Cambridge who are amazing scientists. They're not just ordinary professors of the university, which are in Cambridge, again, that's good enough, but these are internationally renowned scientists. They're fellows of the Royal Society, and I am privileged to know them. They are world-renowned scientists, but they will stand here in front of us and say they're also a believer and a Christian. They can be both. So the fight isn't between science and Christianity. They would say fight is between materialism or scientism and Christianity. In other words, science itself, you can practice that whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. There's no conflict whatsoever. Very simple answer, but some great books on that as well.
No, that's really helpful, thank you. Let's get into, in the last few minutes, the issue that you were speaking of. Isn't guilt just a subjective feeling, and we need to just get over it?
Yeah, so I tried that. As I said in my talk, I went on for weeks and weeks, and I couldn't shake it. And I think this is what I'd probably say. Do you know, all of us are very good at being in good terms with ourselves. All of us have a mechanism within us which will defend us and against any kind of accusations as such, which in itself is sin. We would never call ourselves sinful as such. But what happened to me and what should happen is that the more we get a glimpse of God, the more we see sinfulness within us. So seeing that girl who was so transparently Christian and godly, there was something within her which showed me up. Even more so when we go to the Bible. More so when we go to God himself. As I read that, the Bible, I find, is like a mirror. It shows up what I'm really like. I could speak medically, for example, and the harm guilt does to mental health issues. And so it's not just something you can switch off. I think it's something which is real and does affect people.
Can you just illustrate a little bit, elaborate on that just a little bit more, medically, and the harm of guilt, psychological damage?
So living with something like guilt, not having resolution within us or doing something, it affects our mental health as such. I mentioned that verse, for example, which says, "Come to me, those who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Rest is a place of peace, of lack of anxiety, of joy, of acceptance, of identity in Christ and other things. Not having those, not having that framework leaves us empty and affects mental health and issues like that. And we all know the rocketing up of mental health issues amongst teenagers, but also amongst adults as well. And particularly suicide is just going up and up.
And Charlie, just on this issue of guilt, what would you say to somebody who ignores guilt or seeks to explain it away, or maybe just doesn't feel any of the things that Piyush has spoken about?
Yeah, thank you. And that was much more where I was coming from. So when Jesus says in the verse I read that those who are well have no need of a doctor, but those who are sick, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. He's having a go, really, or it's a ticking bomb that will explode on them later, where he's saying, if you think you're good, well, I've got nothing for you. And that was completely my experience. I had a very religious Christian upbringing, Catholic and Protestant combined, and I thought I was one of the good people. And when I first understood that Jesus wanted to forgive me, I was angry with that idea. I don't need that. I'm a good person. And I think that relates to what Piyush was saying, that the feeling of guilt, you might feel more guilt than you should. Most of us feel less guilt than we should. We defend ourselves very easily. But that doesn't affect the reality. And the illustration here is medical. So I may feel well, or I may feel sick, but the reality may be that I need to go and see Piyush and have my neck sliced open and a cancer removed. And the reality is the problem, not how I feel about it. And Jesus, as God on earth, says that we all have a reality of our rebellion against God and a guilt and a punishment that we face for it. And we, in the words of the question earlier, we don't normally treat the guilty, the really guilty. Harvey Weinstein does not need to go away and be helped to feel better. He needs to be held accountable, found guilty, and punished. And God is a judge who sees us that same way, but in Jesus offers to take that guilt from us. So it isn't about how you feel, there's a reality to it.
So what you're saying is that there is a subjective element, which I was talking about. There's also an objective element. I'm guilty before God for what I've done wrong as well. So I might not feel guilty, but in front of God, that's very helpful.
Piyush, there are so many questions here about your family. Naomi, aged 11, has asked about your family and did they ever reconcile to your Christian faith? Baz has asked exactly the same question. There are about 5 questions.
Yes. So, I'm so grateful that I am on very good terms with my family. My sister has come to Christ and became a Christian. My father sadly died a couple of months ago. My mother's coming next week to come and live with us for 6 months. So we are reconciled. It's still, and I don't want to say too much about my family, but I will say this, that the day I became a Christian, I started to pray for my family. Because I just realized the importance of this. I would love my family to be where I am at the moment. I love my family dearly. One of the things the Bible tells me is that I have to honor and respect my family. I love my family far more now than I ever did before because I have the love of Christ in me. He's shown me how to love and how to honor my parents. And so, thankfully we are on good terms, which is so good.
Well, we're so grateful to both of you for speaking this evening. And Piyush, thank you for coming all the way down from Cambridge to join us. Just one last word. If somebody's listening and has been thinking, well, I'd love to investigate further, to know more, or even tonight to know this forgiveness for myself. I mean, could you just tell us in a couple of short sentences how somebody could, as it were, have that reality in their life that you've spoken of?
May I say a couple of things? The first thing I'd say would be just the course you mentioned earlier on. You know, because I was at a stage when I needed help for people to explain to me what things meant. And we all need help. Christian explained, I'm sure it's a course which I went to, very welcoming, very friendly, any questions allowed, no topic is off limit, and where you can safely ask the questions at your own pace and take things on at your own pace. That's the first thing. But if you are at that point and you think, you know, I just want to make a start with Christ, and you could do simply what I did, which is that day, February 23rd, 1982, I went home, I knelt by my bed, I acknowledged that I had made a mess of my life, that I wanted to be different. I knew that Jesus could help me in that, so I prayed for forgiveness. I prayed that he would wipe away the past and come live within me by his Spirit. I asked him to help me to live with him as my Lord. In other words, living with my way, I'd made a mess. I wanted to live a different way with a new king in my life, and to help me day by day. And one thing I was encouraged, and I do that every day since then, is that I start my day every morning with the Bible open and prayer. And that has been the best thing I was taught, which is just to start my day by day by reading. Again, we need help to see what to read and how to read and what aids. Again, a course like Christian Explored will help with that, but that, I think, would be beginnings of how we progress. Yeah.
Piyush, thank you so much.